And joining us now, great to welcome a man who's edited a really fascinating book for anybody who's interested in the crime stories. This is called The Book of Crime, more than 166 years of covering the beat, the New York Times. And we're joined today by Kevin Flynn. And Kevin, up in New York, I believe, today. And Kevin, good to talk with you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Doug, for having me.
Yeah. Did they clean up the mess yet up in New York with the snow?
Trains are not running that great, but the streets are paved.
Yeah, I grew up there, so that's why I'm down here now. I don't miss all that snow. So.
Right.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the book here. It's anybody who's grew up in New York, but really around the country, around the world, has read the New York Times, and their crime coverage has always been one of their top award-winning departments. So this is really kind of a good project for you, right? You were part of the New York Times crime reporting force for a long time.
Yeah. The idea here is that we've done a couple of books of compilations in the past about more limited topics like wine or medicine. In this particular case, we wanted to do something that had a broader appeal. So the Book of Crime has the natural public interest because everyone feels like they could be affected by crime at any point in time. There's a voyeuristic aspect to why people want to read about crime, in part because they feel like if they come to understand why crime happens, they may be able to try to avoid and protect themselves. Now, in reality, I think that's a fool's errand in that I think that crime happens to us in situations that we can't necessarily anticipate or prevent, but that doesn't change the fact that instinctually we feel like we'd like to be better prepared, and so I think we read what we can about crime.
Yeah, I think reading about it and all these TV shows on, Criminal Minds and all the NCIS shows, people are fascinated with
yes, they are. And they're fascinated by the mystery of solving it as well.
Yeah. And again, this is stories in the Times, so I imagine you spend a lot of time, I guess they still call it the morgue, right? It's probably all on microfilm now, or on the computers now, right, where you go back and look at the old stories, huh?
Right. The way we did it was, I think probably started about 18 months ago, and we decided that we would try to separate it into various topics of crime rather than just do it strictly chronologically. Mm-hmm. And so once we came up with the topics, then we tried to find sort of like the greatest hits within those topics. But it was very, very difficult to limit a particular topic to like 8 to 10 articles. So, for example, like organized crime, the idea that you could tell the history of organized crime over 166 years in 8 to 10 articles is crazy. So we did the best we could. There are 8 very important articles, but they don't necessarily tell the whole story, but they give you a very good glimpse of the best reporting on organized crime that the Times has ever done. We originally were going to have a police chapter, but the idea of telling the story of policing in America in 10 stories with all the acts of heroism, all the innovations of fingerprinting, of DNA, of all the controversies over policing tactics, so much of that seemed to be fraught with peril to do that in 10 stories, and so we decided that we would take that chapter out and perhaps do an entire book down the road about it.
Oh, that would be interesting, yeah. Well, you talk about the different categories, assassinations, of course. In the book, you have it all go back to Lincoln, his assassination, of course, then Kennedy in the 60s, 100 years later.
Yeah, and with Lincoln, the thing that I'm consider myself something of a student of history, but I was never aware that John Wilkes Booth had the level of help that he did.
Right.
And when I started reading up in the old Times articles, what I thought was like maybe 1 or 2 people who helped him really was about a half dozen people, including a woman, Mary Surratt, who was ultimately hanged by the United States government, the first woman to ever be executed by the United States government. And I was struck by how broad the conspiracy was, that he wasn't simply a lone wolf.
Interesting, too, you read that particular article, and the real old ones, the different type of style of writing and kind of the flowery, different type of descriptive language, too, particularly for the Lincoln story.
Yes, and I noticed that in the Al Capone era, there was a big shooting in Chicago called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Yeah. And the lead of the story is something like, people in northern Chicago celebrated St. Valentine's Day today with, like, the rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns and a steady stream of bullets. And that's the kind of writing I associate with, like, sort of tabloids. But there it was, for a period of time in the Roaring '20s, the New York Times had completely adopted that tone when telling gangster stories.
They're kind of like those, 1940s film noir movies, right? The way they talk.
Right, like a film noir, exactly.
Well, as I mentioned before we started recording, I grew up in New York, and one of the huge stories in the mid-late 70s, that summer, The Son of Sam, and of course the Times was on top of that. I mean, you got a chapter in the book about that story. That fit a bunch of different categories.
Well, there's only one topic in which we use two stories, and that was The Son of Sam, in part because we wanted to tell the whole story at its conclusion because it was so fascinating, but also we wanted to do a story that somewhat replicated what the fear was like in the New York City environs during the period when, if you went out and parked, most of his victims were young people who were out necking in parks and the like, maybe coming back from the movies. And for a whole generation of kids, that summer was considered to be the summer of, like, danger. And I happened to be, I grew up in the Bronx, but I happened to be in East Hampton, New York, which is a nice, rural, almost farm town, and now a ritzy resort town out on Eastern Long Island. And I thought I was quite safe because the killings were all happening in the Bronx, but when the Bronx and Queens and the other boroughs. But when they finally caught Sam, it turns out that his next victims, he was headed for the Hamptons.
Right.
And so the newspaper the next day, after they caught him, was Sam had been headed to Hamptons. I was like, oh, good. I'm glad they caught him.
And they caught him with an unpaid parking ticket. That's what was the...
And they caught him with an unpaid parking
that's
ticket.
How they got him. Yeah, that was a crazy summer. Yep. Obviously, the tragedy of that, but you had a blackout. And you had the Yankees' wild season. That was one of the craziest summers I ever remember.
Sparky Lyle, and that was
the Bronx is
what
burning.
They called the Bronx Zoo.
Yeah, the Bronx is burning. That
Yep, the Bronx is burning.
Well, it's really a fascinating...
And now the Bronx, actually, there are sections of the Bronx now in the lower 140s, even south of Yankee Stadium, which is on 161st Street, that have been completely renovated, and there are parts of the South Bronx that are doing much, much better than they were years ago.
Oh, good. I haven't been up there in a while, so I got to check that out, because last time I was there, it was still, you could still see the embers.
Yeah.
Well, the book is filled with great story, and you go into the whole Bernie Madoff story, which is a little more recent, and it's called the New York Times Book of Crime, 166 years of covering the beat, and we've been talking with Kevin Flynn, who put this book together. Kevin, give out your website or where people can get more information about the book.
There's no website, but there is, it's available in major bookstores and, of course, through Amazon and Barnes & Noble online and all the major online book services as well.
Great. Kevin, a pleasure talking to you. Wish we had more time, but hopefully next time you join us, we will. But thanks for being with us today.
Thank you again.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles Media.